Alright, this one should be a good one that will offend and upset everybody. Now for the still image for this video, I picked from the the video game Crusader Kings Holy Fury, and you'll soon figure out why that is. But I wanted to discuss a little bit generic life strategy, why Catholicism, all that stuff, in a way that I think is quite interesting. You'll see there's a little diagram pie chart behind me. We'll get to that in a minute. I caught part of Vox's live stream last night, which was good because I hadn't seen one in a while. I was just been busy and underslept and whatever, but I couldn't sleep last night, so I caught the tail end of it. And it was really good. And Vox made a very important point, when he was also discussing strategy and so on, the fact that you should look forward to conflict and so on. And he made a very important point saying, look, we're all different. We're all unique individuals. Like Owen is a very unique person. The Kurgan is a very unique person. No one else like him. I'm a very unique person. And it's all true, And I've discussed this in generic terms as well before in terms of Christianity and how, Catholicism is where it's at because Protestantism is very schismatic and so on. I've made these arguments before. But I've also made before the argument about why Catholicism. It's one of my other videos. But in an overall overview of things, I think it's quite important to understand where I'm coming from, but even more importantly, it's important to understand what reality is. Because if you don't understand what reality is, where I'm coming from will just seem insane. Now, understanding what reality is not as easy as you think, because remember, we live in the realm of the Prince of the Air. We're under his dominion here, and he is the Prince of Lies. So it's very interesting. Now let's get to this pie chart a second. And the numbers here are not 100% accurate. They'll be out by like whatever 10, 15, maybe even 15% or so, but probably not more than that. Now, originally, this chart is divided into 8 sections. So it's divided into quarters and then into quarters again. But it's colored up slightly differently. There's a reason for that. Roughly speaking, we're not quite there yet, I think, but we're going to be hitting the 8 billion people mark pretty soon. On that basis, you will notice that Catholics, which have got the red cross, because, salvation was achieved through the blood of our Lord. Wine. No, I'm not being sacrilegious. I'm just saying I'm having a sip of wine. And so Catholics are approximately 1.5 billion. 1.3, 1.4, 1.6, somewhere there. 1.5 billion. So that's like one slice of the pie and half the slice of the next one. Muslims are, again, a similar number. It's 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5. I've colored it in at roughly 1.5. So Catholics, Muslims, about the same number. Now there is no overlap here. You can't be Catholic and Muslim. So that's one of the things. Then you've got China. Now China is again 1.3 billion. And again, I've colored it up at 1.5, but that's because I'm throwing in places like, Japan and whatever. Japan's got 120 million people, so China and Japan together, essentially, yellow people. And, oh yeah, by the way, this is going to offend everybody. I told you that, right? So you got all the slanties here, and they're about 1.5 billion as well. Then you got the Panjits, all the Indians, whether they're Muslim, Hindus, Now, there is overlap here, right? Because a lot of Muslims live in India, and there is all in the Indian bit I also throw in places like Saudi Arabia or whatever, which is actually Saudi Arabia, and that is probably going to be more over there, but the Muslim countries that are on the Indian subcontinent are going to be over here. So there is definite overlap here. It's not exact. But I'm throwing in there a bunch of other brown people, like, let's say, the Nepalese, right? I don't have Buddhists in here, you'll notice. That's because they kind of fall somewhere between China and India, for the most part. And they're not really relevant to what I'm going to be discussing. Then you've got Africa. Now that's the population of the whole continent of Africa. Now again, there is some overlaps. There are Catholics in Africa, there are Protestants in Africa, there are Muslims in Africa. They're getting more Chinese in Africa now, and there's definitely some Indians in Africa. So again, this is not, a correct 100% diagram. But remember, this is also my way of helping you to understand how not to be a binary thinker. Try to be a little bit more of a paradoxical thinker. These are big picture, very big picture. We're talking 8 billion people, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different colors. So it's a big picture scenario, right? There is going to be obviously a bunch of overlap. But essentially, if you take the black population, which, yes, has got all the different religious denominations in it, they kind of form a group apart again, because there are not just religious lines, but there are also ethnic lines and so on. So, the average Muslims are going to get along better in some cases than what I would call your average Africans, because the Africans regularly kill themselves by, the hundreds of thousands, as did the Muslims. But in essence, you're going to have more cohesion between a Muslim that is an Arab Muslim with a, say, Indian Muslim or a black Muslim. There's still going to be some level of cohesion there, just like you will have cohesion between Catholic countries. For example, an Italian will get along with a Spanish person or even a South American person probably quite well. So there are these broad descriptors, but in race terms, yellows, browns, blacks, mixture, Arabic and kind of brownish and so on, generically white. Now you'll notice the Protestants are under 1 billion. They're about 700 million, 800 million, something like that. And again, there is overlap between Protestants and Africans and Indians and Chinese even, but keep in mind that the whole population of Catholics in China is like 60 million, which is a dot in the ocean. It's still a huge population. It's like the population of Italy. There's more Catholics in China than there are in the whole of Italy. That's just because the population is the same as the whole country, because they've got so many people. But now, talking about the boogaloo, which will and must happen, there is definitely an economic boogaloo coming, because there is. It's a Ponzi scheme, and Ponzi schemes pop. So, what does that mean? Well, think about it. If the economy goes to shit, that means that all your money is now worthless paper or dots on a screen that mean nothing to anybody. Run on the banks. You now basically standing in the clothes you got in and what you've got in your house. If, like Owen, you got a nice plot of land, fenced in, animals, food, and guns, you're probably going to do okay, especially if you're far away from a population center. If, like me, you're smack dab in the middle of London, or close enough to it anyway, where there are no guns and you basically don't have any kind of ability to farm or anything like that, you're now in the center of zombie town, and you got to hack your way out to the nearest boat, port, or plane, or whatever. Which, if you're doing that with kids and so on, especially if they're little kids, it's going to be tough. There's going to be a lot of people that can't do that and will die. And that's just how it is. So, but again, it is not about me or even you specifically. It's big picture stuff, right? So big picture stuff, what is going to survive best? What's going to survive well? Well, India fucking won't. They're already a mess and destroy the whole economy. They're just going to be eating each other in the street. They're already shit in the street there, so it's not a big step for them. It's going to pretty much carry on as it is. China, similar sort of story. Now, there's an ongoing argument within the Dread Ilk about Vox and his China posts, because, and it surprises me, but this happened before. I mean, when Jordan Peterson ski babble came about, whatever, about 85% of the Dread Ilk were like, Vox has lost, Jordan Peterson is great. And I did make that mistake of thinking Jordan Peterson was great because I saw the one interview he did with that British journalist. That was the only thing I'd seen about Peterson, and I thought, oh cool, he kicked their ass. Then I started listening to his videos, and I listened to about 3 of them. After listening to about 3 of his videos, I was like, this guy starts to say something that sort of makes sense, and then all of a sudden there's like, ah! This is like, you know, scratching a blackboard with nails and grinding your teeth or chewing tin, sort of like, what? What did he just say? And it was absolutely clear within, like I said, 30 minutes of videos. I don't think I ever hit 30 minutes of Peterson. Maybe 20, I don't know. And I was just like, nah, there's something completely off about this guy. And then Vox started to get in on it. And I was laughing because I said, yeah, there's something off about that guy. And most of the Dread Ilk went fucking apeshit. They were like, no, and you too, you thought Peterson was great. And I'm like, yeah, I said he was great on this one comment. And then I kept quiet about it because I actually started looking at his videos and I just thought he's a dick. And then when Vox pointed it out, I said, yeah, you're right. I've always thought there's something dodgy about the guy, you know, so I started looking at him. But about 85% of the Dread Ilk were fucking had it wrong. You know, now everybody's like, oh yeah, Peterson is a shill, is bad news. But again, now Vox is talking about China, and the fucking Dread Ilk are losing their mind. They're like, why is he being so good to the commies, the filthy commies? They eat dogs, you know. And again, I'm like, guys, you don't fucking understand what Vox is saying. He's observing factual statistics, and he's basically saying the Chinese are being coherent. But it goes to how Vox looks at things. You know, he looks at big picture stuff in a strategic sense, and he's basically saying, look, the Chinese are being congruent with their ideology, and they are. And if the West was being congruent with Christian ideology, we'd be kicking the whole world's ass within a couple of years. But we're not. We're being, you know, gaslighted and basically co-opted by Satanists, essentially. That's what happened to the Catholic Church, and that's what's happened through the Protestants, and, you know, and so on and so forth. So what? Well, India's going to be a shit show. China's going to be a shit show. And the reason I mentioned Vox in his blog post is because some people have got the wrong idea that China is going to be the new superpower and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, sure, you can have whatever indicators you have. But there is a very simple reason that I know China isn't going to do shit. And hold on, I need to get a photograph. I forgot to. I need to show you something. Yeah. This is it. So, this is the reason why I know for a fact that China ain't gonna do shit. There you go. His name, he was a general, Generale Gilberti. That is my great-grandfather. There, a bit less light off the monitor. And this man, who had a solid set of steel balls, by all accounts, and who is in history books as well, was in the Boxer War. And he explained that the Chinese were essentially bug people, because he said they were like ants. You would see them coming over the hills in single file, and the man at the front had a rifle. All the men behind him did not have a rifle, and we'd shoot them. And when the guy with the rifle got hit and he'd fall down, the next guy behind him would pick up the rifle and would start shooting back. Because you see, they had a lot more men than they had rifles. Now imagine a people that fights that way. And his comment at that time was like, how can you win against people like that? You know, they're never going to stop coming. And given the technology they had in those days and so on, that could be a pretty demoralizing thing if you're seeing these rows of ant people coming over with like one rifle at the front. But you know, if you're sitting there with your Maxim machine gun, you can just Gatling gun the crap out of them, shooting fish in a barrel. And you know, I've had interactions with some Chinese people. I was in China actually when I was working in Kazakhstan. I briefly had a trip there. The Chinese don't worry me. Yes, they've got huge numbers. The scariest thing that the Chinese can do is give their people passports. That's it. In terms of, you know, flat out warfare, Sure, you know, if you're, you know, Taiwan or you're Nepal, you're probably in shit. But if you're America or Europe, not really. You know, Russia is going to be a huge buffer, and if China went to war with Russia, that would be a tragic mistake by the Chinese. I can tell you that now. Now, but that said, so China is really going to be a mess. You don't want to be in China when the boogaloo hits. You definitely don't want to be in India. I'd probably rather be in China than India, honestly. You don't want to be in any of the Middle East areas because all that shit really is just going to be one giant clusterfuck. So what are you left with? Africa, Europe, or the Americas, right? Now, Africa is not actually a completely terrible choice because you're always going to have pockets in Africa of people are just going to leave you the fuck alone, even if you're white. It is true that you will need a little enclave of white people, and it is true that to some extent you'll be at the mercy of the masses. And the masses in Africa are particularly stupid and dangerous. They'll think nothing of stringing you up and using your kids as footballs while they chop their limbs off. I'm not kidding. This shit's happened before and undoubtedly will happen again. They are brutal, you know, because they are more primitive to a certain extent. That's just the connection. So, but there will be pockets of places in Africa where you can have a little enclave and probably do all right, you know, but most people wouldn't want to live there like that. And there is always the overarching danger that some invading group of people that whatever got displaced overruns your land and then it's zombie town. So, you know, if you're a white guy in Africa, you better have a lot of guns, you better be in one of the least populated countries, and you better have access to clean water and that stuff. And there are people that are like that, you know. I very much know people like that, and they would probably do okay. But it's a little bit like The Walking Dead. If a zombie horde happens to be just walking through your area, then you're fucked. So what does that leave us? Protestant lands and Catholic lands. Europe and America. Now Europe is going to be a battleground. Whatever happens, when the boogaloo hits, Europe is going to be a mess. But it's a white man's mess, which is still better than yellow man's mess and definitely better than a brown man's mess. So there are, again, especially countries in Europe that I would, if I had to be in Europe when the boogaloo hits, I would probably want to be in Italy, because Italy has got a very diverse geography. It's got mountains, it's got sea, it's got forests, it's got a lot of little difficult to get to places that have got possibility for good food. The people are quite intelligent and willing to cooperate and nominally Catholic to a very good degree still. Even though Novorossians, but the Catholicism in them is quite deeply ingrained through generations. So even if they're fooled, even if they're like church and Catholics, there's still enough real Catholicism that it is probably not a bad place to be. And if you're in a place like Venice, which is difficult to take over or get to, food is relatively plentiful as long as you can keep pulling things out of the sea. Water, Venice survived for thousands of years now, so it's definitely livable. Also some little places in the mountains. And then, there is North America, again, is going to be a shit show. And I actually compare North America to Africa because, yeah, there are going to be enclaves of guys with guns and whatever. But your zombie horde in America is going to be very well armed. It's going to be a zombie horde of police or military that have gone, either independent or that are under the command of somebody that doesn't see things the way your group sees things. And if that bunch of people also have access to military things like drones, tanks, and fighters, fighter planes, then you're in deep shit. In Africa, you're not going to have that problem. In Africa, if you got a good rifle, and there's 10 of you, and you all know what you're doing, and you've all got a good rifle, you can probably hold a fucking platoon of average African soldiers, In America, not so much, It's going to be a bit of a Waco, really. So, bit dodgy. I don't know. I probably prefer to be in Europe than North America. Canada, well, they're just gay, so they're just going to show their ass, take it up the ass, and just, you know, survive. So, and also there's a lot of land in Canada, so I think Canadians will probably be all right. It's not going to be a huge fight to the death out there, especially if you just, you know, go out and bit into the sticks, build yourself a cabin, you're fine. But now we come to the religious aspect, which means, why Catholicism? Well, because Protestantism, as I said, is schismatic. Keep in mind that under, you know, there's less than 1 billion people in there, and there's over 40,000 denominations. Some of them pretty fanatical in really weird ways. So, no. But you're saying, if you're smart and if you've been paying attention, you're now saying, yeah, but, you know, it doesn't really matter because, yeah, you're a Catholic, but all those guys are church and Catholics. You guys, you know, there you go. There's a tiny little dot, which you can't even see there. Tiny little dot. And you guys are saying, those are the real Catholics that thinks things like you and, you know, that reject Vatican II and so on. Yeah, that might well be true. But that's exactly my point. I have now had enough communication with people that converted to real Catholicism since my book Believe came out. And messages, emails, conversations with people that have been brought to the true real church again, or back to it, or newly, freshly to it. And I can tell you something. They're militant. In some cases, they're pissed off. In some cases, they're not pissed off. They're just happy. They're like, oh, finally, that's why it never made sense. Now it makes sense. And they're active. Immortal Nameless Bear is already talking about getting a bunch of families together to build a compound and again work your way to a city-state. Because remember, when the Boogaloo happens, the next evolutionary thing that's going to happen is going to be the city-state. And the city-state comes from communities. Communities that know each other, that protect each other, that all think the same, and that pretty much all look the same. So why do I keep insisting on Catholicism? Well, first of all, for the very obvious reason that Catholicism is true. Secondly, the truth will set you free, which means what? That as long as you keep telling the truth, look at the potential pool of people that we have to wake up, who already know quite a lot of the stuff that we know, and all they gotta make is that switch from like, oh, Bergoglio's an imposter, so's Ratzinger, so were all those guys who created Vatican II. And the new canon law is bullshit. But we still have the old canon law, which is great, and it works. And hey, we still have real decent priests that give you sound, hardcore, good advice. You know, I was talking the other day with my wife about, like, somebody said, oh, wow, how can a priest that's never been married give you advice about marriage? And we both looked at each other and laughed. Because actually, the advice on marriage that we got in the catechism that we did before we got married with our priest was awesome. And it's not because the priest is so great. I mean, the priest is so great. Don't get me wrong. He's awesome. I like the guy. He's a proper war priest, you know, as a battle priest. But it's awesome advice because it's based in truth. And that truth has been discovered and expounded and explained and delved into for a couple of thousand years by very smart men, by doctors of the church, and experience. You know, there's a reason why the rules of marriage in a Catholic household make sense, and they really do. And they kick the shit out of any, you know, therapist. Oh, I'm going to have a therapist I'm going to have a marriage counselor. They don't know shit. Those are secular, satanic influenced people, you know, even if they mean well. They don't have the answer. Trust me, I know. I've met and known intimately a number of psychologists, psychiatrists, whatever. So that's basically why. Because when we've got a huge potential pool of converts. And this is where I come to the Warlords model of strategy. which is why I mentioned Vox at the beginning. Remember, I have these huge loops that I come back and hook you back into when I remember. And when I don't remember, because it's kind of obvious to me, so I have to kind of remember that, oh, you're not going to link those two things if I don't come back to it. So I'm trying to do that. So what do I mean by the Warlords strategy? The Warlords strategy is take a guy like Vox, and I did a video earlier on Bas Rutten. Take a guy like Bas Rutten, take a guy like Owen, take a guy like myself. We're going to have our own little communities. Right now, most of those are online. I am heavily starting to, really just starting, we're at the proto beginnings of it. And my focus is going to be on creating in the flesh communities, meet up and get to know each other communities. That's why I mentioned about the Catholic warrior type thing. We've now got a couple of guys that have volunteered and said, yep, I'm interested, I'm in, let me know when it happens and I'll get myself there. And I just said, look, if we have enough, and I don't care if it's 2 guys, 4, 5, 6 or 50. If we get enough guys interested who are in London or who can make it to London that will say, you know what, I will meet up with you on a weekend. We will hire a hall, we will hire a room, we will hire a place somewhere where we can have a little seminar, couple of hours, maybe 3 hours, maybe 4 hours, a little bit of instruction, a little bit of explaining what we're about, and physical work, like Systema stuff, punch, learn how to move your body, learn how to take a hit, learn how to give a hit, the basics, just basic stuff of Systema training, and Catholic Catechism. Mix those two things together and let's see, it's an experiment. Let's see how it goes. I think it would do very well. I know that Immortal Nameless Bear in the States is busy creating a little community. And that is going to be my focus. But even before that, we all have our own little communities online. I mean, there are guys that listen to all of us, Vox, Owen, and myself, but you will have a preference. Vox and Owen have got much bigger audiences than I have, of course. And that's because I started long after them to even do videos or to, my blog was actually doing pretty well until a whole bunch of personal shit happened around 2011, 2012. All that shit started around 2010. But anyway, since about 10 years ago, pretty much, my blog and books and stuff had just started taking off and was doing well. And then I just kind of abandoned it before, family shit that went on. And I've only really just started to even pay any attention to it again. And it quickly is starting to pick up again. But there will be people that prefer Vox to Owen or prefer me to both or prefer Owen to both or whatever, and that's fine. And there's people that are going to be like, no, I like Owen best for this, I like Vox best for this, and I like the Kurgan best for that. And that's the smart play, but you will have little fiefdoms, if you like, warlords, barons, and we're going back to, pay attention, we're going back to the feudal model, which I've mentioned before. The feudal model is what created eventually city-states. And the feudal model was you had a baron who had the land and the castle, protected the peasants, protected his cities, his land, and in turn his peasants could farm and work the land and would give a portion to it to the baron, who in turn would give a portion of that to the king. And that's how it worked. It was the feudal system. It's not slavery. Depending on your baron, the peasants could have been really well treated or really badly treated, because either they had to give 90% of everything they produced and they were barely on the breadline, or in some good barons maybe only made them give 10% or 20% of what they produced, and they could keep the rest and they could live on his land. So there were these feudal rules were good, and that's what we're going to go back to, because once the Boogaloo happens, and there's going to be a huge number of calamities happening when the shit hits the fan. But shortly after that, what do you think is going to happen? A strong man is going to rise up somewhere and people are going to say, okay, you're the leader. Well, I need to eat. My kids need to eat. And he's going to say, well, farm that piece of land. And I'm protecting you and everybody else with my 10 thugs. Me and my 10 thugs will protect you guys. You work that land. You work it like a bitch. And maybe at the beginning you will be a fucking slave, you know, if you're not one of the 10 thugs. But as things eventually normalize, it will go back to a feudal system of city-states. That is the, I think, ideal, by the way, in the human situation in terms of being able to live in a good human way. City-states is, I think, the most advanced way of living, and the feudal system is a very advanced way of living. It is true that under a feudal system you will be far less likely to be able to create things like spaceships, but not impossible. And you know, that's kind of another conversation. So, and if we have enough time, and if we convert enough Catholics to proper Catholicism, which checks the clergy right at the door, makes sure the clergy doesn't fuck up like they did before, keeps the Catholic dogmas and way of life alive and well, and keeps expanding it, militaristically expanding it, you know, peacefully where possible, and aggressively where not possible, very quickly you would have a very powerful force that I believe would even be quite comfortable with sending, you know, probes into space and creating anti-gravity spaceships and what have you. So that's why I picked that that still image for this video about Crusader Kings, because that ultimately is, I think, where it's gonna go. You know, you will have essentially fiefdoms once the dust settles a little bit. And Crusader Kings, why Holy Fury? Because what is coming is, to a certain extent, also a punishment for our lax ways, for our having abandoned the true faith, for our just having given ourselves over to hedonism and lies. So, to a certain extent, there is going to be a Holy Fury, and we'll be the recipients of it. And then there's going to be, you know, the fights between all the little warlords. The good thing is that warlords like myself, Vox, and Owen, let's say we all live geographically in the same sort of area. You know, if you were in Vox's land, you would have to do things Vox's way. If you're in my land, you do things my way. And if you're in Owen's land, you do things Owen's way. But all three of us, we would essentially be allies. You know, I wouldn't say, you know, one of Vox's guys strays into my lands. It wouldn't be like string him up and chop his head off. It would be like, where are you? Who are you? Oh, I am from House Vox, Supreme Dark Lord, you know. Oh, all right. Well, this is House Kurgan. This is what you do when you're around here. Just behave and you're fine. You know, you're a friendly. And so on. So that is where it's going to go. So again, if you're a Protestant, you're shit out of luck, because you won't have that. And you might have your little, but I've got a community, I've got my little community of all rednecks, and we're all rednecks next to each other, and we're going to do well. Yeah, you might, and you might survive, but you're not civilizational building. You're existential. You might be able to continue to exist. You're not going to build a civilization of, you know, redneck Baptists or whatever. It ain't going to happen. They're not going to build jack shit. Because as soon as the stress fractures and as soon as the pain is high enough, Protestants will do what Protestants do, which is split. They will split. That's what they do. Catholics have a long history of not doing that. So that's why I'm saying, also from a purely practical point of view, Catholicism is the way to go. And that's it. I probably haven't been as offensive as I thought I would be, because I didn't specifically talk about any specific race or any specific nation so much. But just know that I dislike all humans equally. Very fair about that. All right, that's it for today. Have a good one.